everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to Rashmi Becker from Step Change Studios. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Rashmi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's genuinely such a pleasure to meet you. But second of all, how's your day going so far?
It's really good. Today's been a day of back-to-back conversations about best practice in a way. So this podcast fits in quite nicely to talking about my work. But I've been talking to a national charity about how to support people with complex needs. And then I've been talking to an alliance of dance organizations about inclusive practice. And then I was talking to a colleague about how we can find good teachers. And now I'm here with you today. So lots of conversations today.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite coincidental, isn't it, that the podcast happens to fit into today? But
I
it sounds
know.
like, yeah, it sounds like you've had a really busy day, but it sounds like it's all been brilliant.
It has, yes.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, to begin with then, can you tell me a little bit about Step Change Studios?
Sure. So Step Change Studios is a dance company that supports disabled people to participate in dance. We work with all ages, all abilities in a whole host of settings. So that includes schools, hospitals, care homes, in community settings, and we also have our own classes in dance studios and leisure centres and other spaces too.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that sounds brilliant. But can you tell me about your role and what it entails?
So I established Step Change Studios. It started off as an idea about 7 years ago. There were a lot of different factors that I think came to bring it to life. I became guardian to my older brother who has severe autism. He is blind in one eye and he has various health conditions. And I took over as his sort of guardian and being responsible for him about 10 years ago. And one of the things I had ownership was trying to change his sort of life from having been in a very unpleasant care setting where he was very sedentary and had no real opportunities to moving into an assisted or supported living environment. And getting him involved in lots of activity. And what was fascinating was that a lot of the things we thought were related to his disability actually proved to be related to his environment. Because as soon as we changed his setting and he started doing things that, were engaging and fun. And so that was, swimming and, getting involved in music and movement and trampolining and all sorts of physical activity. We saw such an improvement in his quality of life. It was tremendous. And I'd also been working with a lot of disabled people in social care. I had a role working for some national social care providers, and I had a background in disability advocacy. My PhD is related to intellectual disabilities. And all of that and my background, particularly with sport and being, active myself, um, I had a strong understanding of the impact of being active, being creative on mental health and well-being. I'm also a board member of Sport England. I was a board member of the Activity Alliance, which is responsible for enabling and promoting disabled people's participation in sport. So all these things just were endorsing and reinforcing the evidence of the benefits of sport and physical activity for disabled people. And there just wasn't very much available in the dance space when it came to inclusive opportunities. I was finding that people were asking me where they could take part when I was calling dance schools. I was constantly getting pushback in terms of reasons why people couldn't take part, whether that was a dance studio saying a wheelchair user couldn't come because their wheelchair would damage their floor, or hearing from blind people saying that they'd tried to join local dance classes and were told, that they couldn't join. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can just create some opportunities. I set up Step Change Studios thinking it would be, a weekend thing or the odd project. I had, other full-time work, but it just snowballed. And what's been really nice is it's been very organic. And so it's been people reaching out to me and different groups and people with different disabilities saying, do you provide anything for blind people? And I didn't, but when I realized there wasn't anything, I was like, oh, okay, let's do that. And that's continued in different work that we do, working with different groups in different spaces. And so it still remains a very organic process where, we go to where people ask us to go, where, support is asked for. We do different dance styles. We've introduced new dance styles. And it's just, it's continue to thrive, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, doing research about you guys and things like that, I mean, it sounds absolutely brilliant. And, like you said, from you expecting it to just be a weekend thing to what it is now. I mean, it sounds like it's really taken off. But you mentioned earlier about a lot of the things that you thought were related to your brother's disability were actually related to his environment. And I can imagine that that would have been like a real learning curve for you guys. Is that something that's right to assume?
Definitely. It still is. It's interesting because every day, whenever we're working with people and if there are challenges, and especially, with dance teachers that come to work for Step Change Studios, I'm often, a phrase I use all the time is, think about more than dance. So it's easy to think of a dance session as just a dance session. But, when you're going into a care home, thinking about what sort of day that person might have had or people might have had, what the weather's like can impact people, what the setting's like, often in care settings, particularly, and in the sector that we have in terms of social care, where there's a huge lack of resources, people often don't have the same staff, and so they can have temporary staff or unfamiliar people coming in, and their environment can be really affected, and routine can be very important. And so if someone's routine's been changed, there's so many things that can impact someone. If someone's traveling to us, the transport situation and people that are reliant on, whether it's dial-a-ride, for example, not turning up, there's so many different factors that are so important to the experience someone has and that will affect their ability to be able to take part, to engage, and to benefit from a session. It's really important to understand their lived experience, the context of what's happening, and to make sure that you're bringing people with you in terms of the wider support. Because again, so many people we support, they're reliant on carers or maybe parents or other family members to help them do things or get to places. So making sure that you're not trying to treat dance as just one isolated activity and trying to make it more of a holistic experience and understanding the wider experience of people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important to be open-minded and have the ability to adapt to whatever situation you may be in, whether that person's had a bit of a bad day or whatever mood they're in and things like that, the things you've just mentioned. And I think that can also apply to all aspects of life as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that this work does. It makes you, I think, more open-minded and to question things. It's very easy to sort of be quick to make judgments and to, I find myself now in every situation when, whether it's just going to the shop and if someone's sort of sharp with me or something, just thinking, well, has something happened? What sort of day are they having? And maybe they've got something, challenging that they're dealing with, and just taking a moment to think about, what might be going on. And I think it definitely helps you more broadly with your relationships, but also the things we take for granted. And so many people we work with, it's so interesting. I mean, we just had a really interesting project where we took our first group of blind students who were part of a blind ballroom dance event to the very first competition open to blind and partially sighted people in Blackpool, dancing at the famous Tower Ballroom. And again, we work with a lot of volunteers and other people, and it was really interesting going through that process, because while we were focused on the dance and the competition, I was having to be really mindful of the fact that for a lot of people, traveling away from home, taking transport that they never had, staying overnight somewhere strange and in a room they're not familiar with, all the different elements of, whether it's getting dressed and having to use facilities that they're not familiar with, and being in a strange place, and so many things that we would just take for granted, and really needing to think about every single element was really important. And so while we were celebrating the achievement of them on stage or on the dance floor, for me, all the offstage achievements were also absolutely amazing. And it was important to recognize what people achieved beyond what they did on the dance floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really good to recognize as well, that even the little things can count as a really big achievement. And I can imagine for them as well, that would have been a real sense of accomplishment, not only the incredible things they were able to achieve on stage, but also the fact that they did have to maybe take new transport, be somewhere they weren't familiar with, try new things. I can imagine that would have made them feel really good as well.
Absolutely. And also, what a lot of people tell us, and what I've learned over the years is, disabled people we work with are so used to people telling them what they can't do and thinking of them in terms of risk. And one of our students has said that if you hear it enough, you start to believe it, and you start to see your limitations rather than the possibilities. And I think one of the things that we try to do as Step Change Studios is focus on potential and focus on possibilities. And if we can create those opportunities, people then gain confidence and start to realize, oh, well, if I can do this, what else can I do? Maybe I can try another sport, or maybe, I can. When we started our blind program, a lot of people were ringing me up because they were nervous about transport and they hadn't had to travel on their own. And we had volunteers sort of supporting them. But very quickly, once they started having something to look forward to and a dance class and had friends, I think the majority of people now travel on their own. And I remember, one lady being really proud that she'd been able to take the bus on her own for the first time. And so that's really, really important, as you said, celebrating those things that are easy to overlook, that are massive when it comes to those first steps that people take that have seemed like big barriers, and things that they themselves have not thought they could achieve, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say then is your sort of thought process for designing the classes for different disabilities?
It's a detailed process, and there are a couple of key things. Firstly, with all our sessions, the planning element is really important. And so whatever session, if it's a new group, having it, so we work for different types of organizations as well as providing classes for individuals. So we have a process of trying to gather as much information as we can in terms of why someone is wanting to join, because the motivation is really important. So if it's about getting fit, if it's about becoming a good dancer, if it's to make friends, because a lot of people we support are very isolated and lonely. Is it about wanting to be on stage and perform or compete? So getting an understanding of the motivation, understanding their needs and abilities so that we can adapt. So, whether they have mobility aids, whether they have a guide dog, whether they have a walker or wheelchair or manual wheelchair. So understanding, how sort of how they like to learn, how they like to communicate. So a lot of people we support may be non-verbal. They might, again, with our blind people need or prefer audio description, or some people use, different communication systems like pictures or objects that help them understand, what something means. So understanding their communication needs. And then getting a sense of how that can all work together. So, designing a program where you're meeting people's ambitions and expectations and getting the right balance between comfort and challenge. So, trying to find that balance where you can just push people maybe beyond what they're comfortable with to help them realize their own potential is really important. And then thinking about things that you can use in the session that might be helpful as well. So, whether it's, a lot of people we work with have sensory needs or sensory sensitivity. So thinking about how you can use props or equipment and music and other things that can help make it easier for people to learn and engage. That's really important. So I think the planning element is really important. And then, during the session, and actually during planning, it's accepting that it's okay not to get things right and to learn from processes and to have a dialogue with the people we support. So constantly checking and asking people, if things are working for them, and accepting feedback and being willing to adapt and learn and change. So for example, in the early days, one of our blind dance programs was in a table tennis center, and we were assured that there wouldn't be any table tennis at the time, but they had another floor where there was table tennis. And of course, you could just hear, ping pong balls the whole time bouncing in the background. That made it extremely distracting for blind participants who are really reliant on, hearing and being able to follow audio description, and they're hearing balls bounce all over the place. So, thinking about things like the space, the light, and how the accessibility, all those sorts of things go into planning a session, and having conversations with people, because a lot of people we support, again, they come, they're nervous, they're worried about how they'll look, whether they're facing the right way, whether they're moving the right way. There's a lot of psychological barriers and issues that we have to try to address and try to build people's confidence. So it's a gradual process, but I think preparing as much as possible and then being in a position where you can adapt and learn and have that trust with your participants is really important. That helps you to get things right, or at least to keep improving, so that it's a positive experience for everyone.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it sounds like there's, the planning element is really meticulous and there's so much detail that goes into it. But I mean, it clearly all pays off, because of the classes that you were able to create. And like you say, I think it's important to think about all that detail and to go into all of it so that you can sort of create the best product possible. And also, like you said, accept that feedback and take that on board to see if you can make improvements and things like that.
Definitely. And so much of the learning has come directly from having that dialogue with people, and not feeling like all the answers. We've had our students tell us it's helpful if we wear dark clothing, for example, if they can see light and shade. Or we've had people talk about things like the volume of the music, or the way we might communicate something, or providing support materials, whether that's audio descriptions of things that they can practice to in their spare time. So for Blackpool, we were recording audio of the dance moves for people to be able to follow, at home and in their own time. And just sort of constantly learning. Sometimes people enjoy being in an environment where they're with familiar people. Other times people don't want family or other people around, and they want to be able to have their own space and their own independence. So, each situation is different. So really, having that dialogue and understanding what works for people is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've already kind of mentioned that one of your initiatives is teaching ballroom dancing to visually impaired people. And I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit more. So, can you tell me a bit about this and how it works?
Yes, and again, it's an example of how it wasn't something I was planning. And a number of years ago, I had a call from someone just saying, "Do you provide any classes for blind people?" And I said no, but there's no reason why we can't. And so, I tried to find funding, was able to secure some funding, and we started some ballroom classes, and they've been really popular. And it's again an example where we've had such a wide range of people that have come. They've been very cautious initially. They've been nervous. They're not sure how they're going to look. And so, I had lots of conversations with people initially by phone, sort of reassuring them, just saying, come along and watch. You don't have to join in if you're not sure. And then seeing that develop and build. And we've gone from it being, a social dance class, which it still is, and people come, they make friends, they've gained confidence, they've really sort of pushed themselves outside their comfort zone, to then raising the game and saying, well, how about taking a dance exam, which is not something we would have thought was achievable. And now the group have taken a number of dance exams. And then one of them joked about, dancing because of Strictly, of course, at the Tower Ballroom in Blackpool. And one of the things I like to do is, and my friends will often say this, they'll say, well, I'm nervous about saying to you, I want to do something because you're going to be, well, let's just do it. And, because of this sort of joke we had about going to Blackpool, it's through various conversations with people and the generous support from a particular organization called Freedom to Dance, they opened the doors for us to make this happen. And so I was able to have conversations with a competition organizer that organizes the Open Worlds, which is an international dance competition at the Tower Ballroom. And it's a former champion called Paul Killett that organizes it. And we had a conversation, and that in itself, because all these things are a learning process for everyone involved, and it all contributes, I think, to removing barriers further down the line. So having that initial conversation of what will that look like, how will that work, addressing apprehensions and what sort of adaptations will need to be made, and explaining why certain things needed to be a certain way if possible. And so, for example, one of the things we had at the competition was, which you wouldn't normally, is we had a little sort of open time, which they called a general dance, where our dancer could just come on the floor and get a sense of the space, the acoustics, and feel comfortable in the space before they actually competed. Which is something which we always do with our blind dancers, where we describe the room, we walk around, we get a sense of, the actual physical space. So just, trying to make some simple adaptations that would make it more accessible for our dancers. And so that, that conversation developed, and we were able to get support from all sorts of people. So we had support from, a designer dancewear company that provided the dance clothes for our students, and we had support from all sorts of people just to enable this to happen. Thomas Pocklington Trust, the charity, provided some support, and it was really great because we had a momentum of people willing us to do well. And then it was a gear change for our students, because we'd gone from a social dance class to having to be disciplined. If you're working towards something, you have to practice, you have to be disciplined, you have to be focused. And so, some of the time I had to be quite tough in terms of, making sure people were practicing, making sure that we were ready for the competition so that they could present themselves in the best light. So, it was a lot of hard work. There were lots of challenges. But when they had danced and sort of, come off the dance floor, everyone was on their feet. They got a standing ovation. People were in tears. Our students were in tears because everyone was just so proud of having, achieved what they had. And it was just such a fantastic experience in terms of the camaraderie, achieving a goal. We have sighted partners who are volunteers. So they're just community volunteers that give their time for free every week and come to class. And so, volunteering is such a massive part of what we do. And so our volunteers are really proud and, to have been involved and to have played a part and to have also danced on the floor of such a famous, world famous dance floor. So it was fantastic in so many ways, both in terms of the rewards, the learning, hopefully, removing barriers moving forward. We want to see more, because I don't think there are any other programs in the country that provide ballroom dance for blind students. But we want to be able to see more schools and teachers, being more open, more proactive in terms of supporting blind students, so that students from other schools and other parts of the country can take part in future. And I think what I'm always proud of with Step Change Studios is that we're prepared to be the first and to do things that other people might be averse to or see the risks. And when we've done it once, it then hopefully makes it easier for other people to do it. Or, once they've seen that, okay, there's something there and it's possible, then it makes other people more comfortable and willing to do it as well. So I think that's also something I'm really proud of from having done this, that it's made people sort of pay attention, look at it. And now I'm having conversations with lots of different organizations about how to make sure that develops and grows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it's one of those things, isn't it? If no one's done it before, so like obviously you were definitely one of the first, if not the first, to create, an inclusive dance studio. If no one's done it before, someone's got to pave the way. Someone's got to take that first step and do it. And what usually happens from there is almost like a chain reaction, and people kind of catch on and sort of mimic the idea.
Absolutely.
I think that's so brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really insightful observation, because that's exactly it. It's really interesting, actually, and it teaches you a lot around, I think, human behavior and psychology. That it's about taking that first step. I often say that, people, because I'm often asked as well from younger people, or if I'm mentoring, and I think sometimes people are so worried about getting things wrong that they end up not doing anything. They sort of want everything to line up perfectly and they want everything to be delivered perfectly. And it's better just to start and and to learn in the process as well, and to take that step forward. And you may to make some sort of impact. It might not be everything that you had hoped. And it is interesting. I think people, they need to see something working before they're sort of ready to try it themselves. And I think that, especially with inclusive dance, I think even in the time that I've been doing it, there has been progress and there are more organizations willing to be more inclusive, I think. But again, in the early days, a lot of the mainstream dance organizations and the big brands saw things through a very limited lens in terms of what's a dancer, what's a good dancer, what does good look like, the stereotypical idea of a dancer's body and physicality. And I've had conversations with national dance organizations about whether it's wheelchair dancers taking part of something, and they've been too focused on specifics. Like one organization said to me, but how would you assess foot turnout if someone's a wheelchair user when it comes to dance exams, for example? And just that sort of very limited understanding of what dance is for and how you can make it inclusive and adapt and it's almost as if I think in a wider discussion, you know, when people talk about the social model of disability and how, you know, one has a disability, but it's society and it's the wider environment that actually is disabling. It's the same that, you know, if the world was designed originally, if you're starting with a blank piece of paper and designed it from the perspective of disabled people, it would look very different. And I think because people are starting from the viewpoint of, well, this is what good dance is like, you know, for a non-disabled person, then how do we fit, you know, disability into that rather than thinking in a much more open-minded way of, well, if we were designing dance again, what would that look like without having these structures that are already in place? So just trying to, I think, through, you know, leading by example and showing, well, look, it can work. And I'm often asked it, you know, and by journalists, you know, well, how do you dance if you're in a wheelchair? Or how do you dance if you can't see? And, you know, it can be that limited. And it's only when people see it themselves that they get it, you know. So sometimes it's just leading by example, you know, giving people the opportunity to see, you know, different people dancing, to be able to speak to them, to be able to hear from them, you know, then they start to get it and start to buy into things.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say then are some of the benefits of dance for people with disabilities?
Well, it's huge. And one of the things we used to say, well, I mentioned I used to be on the board of Activity Alliance, which was called the English Federation of Disability Sport. And it did a lot of work about championing disabled people's participation in sport. And they do a lot of research, and it would show that disabled people disproportionately benefit from being active. And those sorts of examples that I mentioned before about my brother, it's the same thing, because disabled people, for example, can experience greater isolation. And so, you know, dance is a way to meet people, to engage and interact with other people. It can be very sociable. So, you know, helping with those sorts of connections and tackling social isolation is one of them, for example. Some of the people we work with have challenges with communication and interacting. And again, it dance and you, because it's not language based as such, and you can express yourself and interpret you know, your movement and your interactions to the music, can be really beneficial for people that are nonverbal, and can help with connections again and with communication. It builds confidence. There's the obvious benefit of the sort of health and well-being aspect. We work with you know, mental health charities, and you know, people have said what they really like about dance is it allows them again to express themselves without having to talk. And you know, it's sort of like a therapy, but without sitting there and having to, you know, talk through every single you know, challenge that they're dealing with. So it can be a way of also, I think, of managing and helping you deal with mental health challenges as well. We found with people we support that have what's called challenging behavior, people with autism who they might be injurious to themselves, to others, or have anxiety, and have difficulty, you know, coping. We've seen fantastic, really, really astounding results, and they can be really small things that might not be noticed by other people, but just in terms of engagement, people that are able to concentrate for a bit longer, you know, to sit in a space and participate and interact. So it can really help again with managing anxiety, managing challenging behavior. So there are, I mean, you know, and we've had some people that we've worked with have said, you know, the disability had impacted their self-confidence to such a level that they just felt they'd never be able to work, but taking part has given them the confidence to apply for work again and to, you know, to go back into the workforce. So the ripple effect is really, really tremendous.
Yeah, I mean, it totally sounds like it. So, what would you say then has been your proudest moment so far?
That's an interesting one, and I do get asked that a lot. And it's there's no one standout, because there are, as I was saying, there are so many things that can seem like small wins, but are massive. So, for example, we had an initiative couple of weeks ago, working with a local authority, where we do a version of sort of Strictly, but it's for disabled people in the community. And so we run free workshops, we go into care homes and special needs schools in the community, and just run free dance sessions, and people can audition. And again, they can audition however they like. And we pick 10 people with a cross section of disabilities and ages. And then they're paired with one of our professional teachers, learn a dance routine, and then perform that, on stage. They get to experience as a sort of a fun element of competition. We have celebrity judges come along. It's free for the public to come along and support. And we were working with one particular care home, and one of the ladies there who was taking part, she's 96, she has dementia, and she was doing a sort of seated dance, a seated Charleston. And at the end of the event, her daughter came up to me, and she was really moved. And she said that was the first time her mother had left the care home in over a year. And it was just so, to hear that she, and it's really brave, to come onto a stage when you haven't left, your care setting for over a year, and to be on stage with lights and, the proper professional sound system and in front of an audience, was tremendous. And it was, you really appreciated just the impact that experience has had on her. But at the same time, I get, my teachers are always sort of sending updates and feedback on sessions that we run. And one teacher, last week just said, someone so she's working with people with complex needs, and we just run very short interactions with different people in that care home. And someone who has never engaged, just sat separately, just sort of got up and just had an interaction with her. And this is after quite a long time of not really seeming interested. And finally, they've had the confidence, and they've felt, this level of trust with the teacher to proactively come up and interact with her. And that's a massive, it's a massive step for that person, and something we can build on. So you sort of feel that sense of achievement in terms of, yes, there's progress. So there are just so many standout moments, from huge things, a bit like Blackpool, obviously that's a massive milestone and it's a first, to really small things that seem small, but are massive steps for those individuals involved.
Yeah, I mean, they all sound incredible, and I imagine that you feel incredibly lucky to be able to be a part of so many incredible experiences.
Definitely. And it's, I think what's nice is because it's such a journey, with all the work that we do, the front end of it, where you are interacting with people, you're seeing the results, you see the impact of the work that you do, is tremendous. The back end can be really challenging at times. And, we're in an environment where, people worry about risk. And so there's lots of bureaucracy around risk assessments and insurance and paperwork. And, there's so much of that, which can be exhausting. And a lot of convincing people, and a lot of, just sort of applying for grants, trying to get funding to make things affordable, trying to find spaces that are accessible, so that's constant. And it's really interesting, because I often have to remind myself, when I'm in the thick of dealing with, a frustrating challenge, or, someone that just, doesn't get it, and you're trying to sort of explain how, why something, would be helpful, or why it's important to support people, or provide opportunities. You sort of have to connect with the end result of what you're working towards. And so that's why it's really nice when you do have, moments. So, seeing my students on the floor with their trophies at Blackpool, and, seeing that sense of pride, or, people achieving things and feeling really happy, and, punching the air because they're so proud of what they've done. That sort of, it does make up for it. But I think there's a lot of work that's still needed in terms of, I think, both systems, whether that's, within the dance sector, but also within organizations that we work with to enable more better diversity and inclusion. And then with attitudes, with people still, it's got better, but there's still a long way to go when it comes to people just not getting, some of the simple things that they can do to make things accessible. Even, I still have conversations around guide dogs and people not realizing the law and trying to sort of gently explain and sort of try and create the right sort of environment for people to be able to participate and having to make sure people are clear on what's sort of reasonable. And so there's still a lack of understanding, but it's only by having those conversations and trying to sort of inform people and expose them, that you can slowly change things.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you or Step Change have any sort of aspirations for the future?
I think a broader aspiration for me is to see a more inclusive dance sector. And you know, I'd like to get to a stage where Step Change Studios isn't needed because someone can ring up their local dance school and have an opportunity to go and participate. And things are improving. There is a better understanding of the need to accommodate people with different needs. Demographics are changing. We're living longer. Most people, will be impacted by disability in one way or another. The last census showed, there's more disabled people. We're 1 in 4 of us now. So it's that sort of, part of me thinks there's an element of adapt or die. People will have to recognize the environment they're working in and need to be more representative. But I'd like to see a lot more proactivity around that. We're small, but we try to influence and advocate for that. We try to lead by example, try to work in partnerships with organizations. And there are so many organizations that are doing really excellent work. But I think my number one aspiration, and I always, in a lot of what I do, I have my brother in mind. And I have to advocate so much for him, whether it's being able to access the local pool or, be able to do certain activities. And I think of people like him that it shouldn't be such a battle to be able to access, opportunities. So personally, that's something I would like to see change and to try and be part of progressing that change. For Step Change Studios, in terms of our day-to-day work, it's just constantly, trying to support people to be able to enjoy dancing and to give people a positive experience and to have good teachers, because there's still, it's always challenging to find people that, are positive about engaging with disabled people when it comes to teaching dance and, understanding what that's about. So it's just continuing to try to deliver a sort of quality service, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that, what you were mentioning earlier about being a part of that change, I think that you and Step Change Studios, you guys are such a big part of that change. And I think that although there is still a very long way to go till we can get to a point where society is completely equal, I think that we will hopefully get there eventually.
Yes, I hope so too.
Yeah. Well, Rashmi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I mean, listening to you talk about Step Change, your journey to becoming what you are now, and everything that you guys do. I mean, I am completely in awe of it. The work that you guys do is absolutely phenomenal, and I think definitely needed as well. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Evie. And if you ever want to come along and see any of our work, please do.
Oh, thank you so much. That'd be brilliant. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.